Hey everyone, welcome to this video about our trip to the Lanphere Dunes that didn't happen. One of the really amazing things about this field trip from my perspective is that it gets people to a place very close to Arcata that a lot of them have not been to before. So we normally drive out through the Arcata bottoms and meet out at the Lanphere Dunes. And if you haven't been through the Arcata bottoms before, you should just take a drive out there. These are the agricultural lands that are due west of Arcata, and that's where I'm standing right now. This is an area that you would have driven through on your way out to the dunes, and that wet area behind me is the Mad River Slough, and this is salt water that comes in with the high tide from the bay from the south and goes back out at low tide. So there are mud flats here that are exposed at low tide, and then they'd be totally covered at high tide. And then over there's actually a levee that was built in the 1800s. It keeps the salt water off of the agricultural lands that are on the other side, and those are all fresh water, just basically from rain input in the rainy season, and you drive through that on the way out here. And this is a really spectacular place to go if you're interested in birding, for instance. The birds out here are spectacular, so I encourage you to come on out. Next, we're going to keep driving across the Mad River Slough. There's a bridge right here that I'll show you, and we're going to drive over that, and then we're going to get to a parking lot that's right on this side of the dunes, and those trees you see back there are on top of sand dunes. So here we go. I really like this road here. It's one of the only gravel roads in Arcata, and it's not open to the public. Our class gets to come back here, and normally we drive our own vehicles back, kind of carpool back, and we're just on the east side of the dunes, so the hill to the right are actually sand dunes, ocean on the other side of that. And we'll get to the parking lot any second. Okay, we're here at the parking lot, but there's only one car here, unfortunately. That be mine. And this is actually a trailhead that says Drifting Sands Trail, and that's where we're heading down there. And it's kind of sad for me to stand here right now, because this is usually where we're all parked. It's just this little lot, and there's a little porta potty there, but usually we have like 7 or 8 cars of yours parked here, and then we'd all circle up, spend some time chit-chatting, waiting for everybody to show up. So it's very social scene, and I am a little sad that it's not happening right now. And we would also divvy up the equipment. We have quadrats that we would be using, and of course data sheets and some things to measure the plants with, but which we all have to carry out onto the dunes. But what I'm going to do is walk on over to the trail and follow the same path we normally would, and we'll just walk out to the site together so you can see it, see what we do. Okay, and so we're going to start walking on this trail toward the dunes, and it feels kind of like a forest right here. There's this giant tree right here, which I love. It's got this beautiful branching pattern, right? And this is a big Sitka spruce. We're kind of at the southern end of the spruce's range, and it looks pretty lush in here. But you'll recall, I'm going to mention before you see this video, how the dunes are always moving inland, and you can start to see right there the sand that's exposed. And this is the face of the moving dune, and every year we come here, it gets closer to the road that I just came off of. And so this looks different than a year ago because of the amazing amount of sand movement. Now, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service installs this great rope system for getting up here, and it's actually pretty steep. So this is looking up the dune face that's moving toward us. We're at the end of the tongue, and so I'm going to try to get up this. It's always a really fun thing to watch the entire class trying to get up here, carrying everything on their backs and whatnot, and feeling completely out of breath by the time you get up here. Even though it's short, it's steep. And so here we are. Let's take a look. So we're at this end of a very long moving tongue of sand. To the left and right, there's stable vegetation. This is kind of cutting through it. And then take a look at this forest that we just sort of walked through. And right here, this is the direction that the dune is moving in. So it will continue to move into that vegetation, and eventually it'll stop. The wind energy will kind of run out, and then the dune itself will get revegetated until there's another blowout close to the ocean. So this is a very actively moving dune. You come out here, especially in the spring, early summer, not only can you feel the sand on your face, but you can hear it and see it as it's moving along the surface. So we're gonna head over there to that furthest vegetation, and on the stable part of the dunes that's to the right of this moving dune is where our Eriogonum site is. Okay folks, well I didn't quite get all the way up to the site, and I ran into this really nice specimen of buckwheat, so I thought I'd stop. This is the dune buckwheat, Eriogonum latifolium. This is not a rare plant. This is a very common plant on the dunes, and it's a huge genus of plants. And a few of the things that you need to know about it is it's a perennial plant. So this is a plant that lives for several to many years. I'm sure these things can live more than a decade. I don't know exactly how long they can live, although our data set would help to answer that question. When they get quite large, they get this kind of woody stem right there. You can see that right here. And they can grow quite a ways from the original plant. So somewhere down there is the root system, but as we'll hopefully see a little bit later today, you can see places where it will creep with above ground stem parts across the sand. It is not deciduous, but all of these leaves are permanent. At least they will last for several years, each leaf, and it always has green leaves on it. Notice that a lot of them have this whitish color to them. So a leaf like this has this woolly material on it, and that of course is something that will help in an environment where it can be quite cold, and that would retain heat on that boundary layer of the leaf. But notice that some of the leaves have that removed, and that is something that a bee does. That's a good example right here, and I think this is the silver bee. Some of you might be able to confirm that or correct that, but you can see where it's been scraped off. The silver bee comes along and will scrape that off. It's the female bees that do it, and they use that to line the cells of their nests where they will put their eggs, and they do that in the sand. And so that's kind of an insulation. It's kind of a neat little thing that you'll see on a lot of these plants. Here are the fruits. So These are clusters of hundreds and hundreds of seeds. There would have been flowers here back in the spring and early summer. And so this is fecundity, if you will. And this time of year, what we see are the seeds starting to fall. So you can see some on the ground. One of the reasons why we do this study right now is that as soon as we get the first rains, those seeds are going to start germinating. And there'll be hundreds and hundreds of seedlings out here. And so we try to do this annually, right before that burst of reproduction. And we can talk about why we do that, but it's worked out to be the best way of doing this. Those seedlings have very low survivorship. They're very difficult to count. And so as long as we're doing this at the same time of year, we have a really good estimate on seedling survival over the first year. Here's another one right there. That's a gorgeous one. So these are pretty big ones. We're going to see some smaller ones when we get up to the site in just a second. All right, so we are standing at the top of the study site right now. So we divided up the study into two basic habitats, the ridge and the swale. And we're at the top of the ridge population right now. And so really what's right behind me is that transect line that I would have described to you hopefully by now, that goes right down the middle of the ridge population. And then the swale population is actually visible from right here, but it's probably not visible in the camera. And it would be over this first low ridge, and I will show it to you, but it's much more open in terms of sand. This site has a lot more vegetation locking up the sand, so the sand's not moving as much, and then the swale is actively moving because the sand is not really being held by any of the plants. So I guess I should say a few things at this place. This is where we normally learn how to do the study. We would all be standing around here. We would get into groups of 3, sometimes 4, and we would make sure everybody has the right equipment in their groups, and then we'd walk through the process together. And I'm going to get down on my hands and knees at some point and show you a plot and show you what data you would have recorded. But this is a really good time for me to say something that I feel like I haven't said yet, and maybe I'll repeat myself because I'll say it live during class. But in this class, our first field exercise is about plants, and our first journal article we read is about a plant species. But this class is not about plants. And we do try to balance our papers that we read among all the taxonomic groups. And we also try to do a second field trip that's usually animal-based, a mark recapture lab. But this lab in particular is good because it teaches us some of the basic concepts of monitoring, including things like how to subsample a population, how to record data, and what are all the many problems that you run into while collecting data that have to be overcome. But here it's interesting to think about how we chose to sample the population. And we are not censusing the population. We're not counting every individual. What we have are a series of plots or subplots set out here that are 2 meters by 2 meters, and they're permanently marked with PVC. And each buckwheat plant in there is also marked, either with a tag, which I'll show you, or with a wooden stake that has a number on it. So this is a way that we can monitor over the long run, and it's really a fundamental process for building matrix models, as you know by now. The other thing that is really important to know is that this would have been the 11th year of sampling. And so it's very unfortunate that we can't do that. We would have had 10 matrices, right, to use in, say, a stochastic analysis. And that's okay. We're just not going to collect the data this year. I'm totally resolved to lose that data, and we'll restart it next year. And we'll miss one transition, and it won't be a problem. But that's the other thing, is that this study has been going on for a long time, and there have been a lot of students involved with it. So let's take a look at some of the plots a little closer up. Before we get down into the sand and look at a plot, I of course keep thinking of things that I'd like to share with you, but this is a better view of the vegetation that's out on this ridge plot. And so most of it's herbaceous, but not all of it is. That's a shore pine right there, which is the same species of one of the most common pines in the western United States that you've surely seen. This is lodgepole pine, but it's a different subspecies of lodgepole pine. And that's the main conifer you're going to find out here on the dunes. So take a look. You'll see some slightly more open sand there. There's another pine. And there's actually a little grove right there. And there are a whole bunch of other really cool things living out here. One of the most common mammals that you'll find are rabbits, and you'll see their fecal pellets all over. If I find a little clump, I'll certainly show you. They're definitely one of the main herbivores. And this is goldenrod, one of the more common plants out here. I'm showing it to you because it's flowering right now, and it's quite beautiful. The genus is Solidago. And then, oh, there's another buckwheat right there. That's a smaller one. So let's move on to a plot. Okay, so this is one of the plots, and actually right now you can see all four corners, which is not always the case, but they're marked by these PVC pipes. So this is in one corner, and there's another one, and another one. And inside of it, you'll see there are all kinds of plants. We put these out here randomly. That is, we selected them in a totally unbiased way 10 years ago when we first started this. And so we didn't even know if there would be buckwheat in the plots. Most of the plots did have buckwheat. In some cases, those plots have disappeared. That is, there aren't any plants there. Some of the empty ones have been colonized. And so they've changed a lot. And we expect them to keep changing. But all of the plants that are in here should be marked, and their coordinates also written down. So the coordinates is just a simple XY coordinate using one corner as the origin. I'm going to focus down on this plant because I'm seeing one of our tags. And so this is what we call a turkey tag, and that's because they're used for poultry. So they're actually called poultry bands. Some people do call them turkey tags. You put them around their legs to keep track of which ones they are. So that says 72, and that's the number of this plant. All of the large ones that are big enough to handle a tag have those, and we would measure the size of these plants with a ruler in two different dimensions, kind of the longest dimension and then at a perpendicular angle, and that would give us a kind of measure of area. We'd also note if it's reproductive or not. Some plants are too small for those turkey tags, and so here's an example of a plant that the students decided was too small for a turkey tag last year, and instead of using a turkey tag, they put in this tongue depressor, and the tongue depressor has a number written on it below ground, so you pull it out to see what number it is. If it's above ground, even though it's a Sharpie pen we use, the sun just hammers it and it bleaches out too fast. If that plant stays alive for a few years, we'll eventually decide to replace the tongue depressor with a turkey tag. And so larger plants should always have turkey tags. I can see some other ones that don't have any tags. There's one, and there's one. So these might actually be new plants that were born last fall when the rains came, and so they're just under a year old right there. And that's part of the job is when you get to a plot like this, what you're trying to do is find all the plants from the previous year and also any new ones. So you really have to scour the ground. This particular PVC pole that we're looking at is the one that's in the southwest corner, and it is the origin. So the x-axis is this axis and the y-axis is that axis. That is not important for you to know, but those are the xy coordinates that a student would write down when they're in here recording plants. Okay, I just wanted to show you quickly, this is how the PVC pipes are marked. At least one of them has this tag that tells you which plot you are. So this is RN40, which means ridge north of the transect, 40 meters down. And so that's the system that we use for knowing which plot we should be at. Okay, here's yet another one of our plots on the ridge. And what I'm seeing here is that this is a pretty actively moving part of the ridge population. Even though most of it is pretty stable, it isn't all stable. And I can see a lot more sand movement has happened here. And a lot of the plants that I'm pretty sure were here last year are not. But I'm also noticing that I don't see one of the PVC corners, which would be over here. And I'm not surprised by that. We lose them all the time. And it's almost always possible to triangulate off the other ones and dig down into the sand and find it and just pull it up a little bit. Here you can see one of them, it is just barely sticking up. That's probably 2 inches. And so there's clearly some sand movement even here. Take a look at, this is pretty much the entirety of the ridge population. So very stable in terms of the sand movement, but not that stable. It's a nice spot. All right, so I'm standing again at the bottom of the ridge population, and we're looking toward the coast, at least you are. And if you see that open sandy area that's right here, that is the swale habitat. So we'll walk down there in just a second. There's a whole nother set of plots. From where I'm standing, I can actually see all the white PVC sticking up that's been down there for 10 years. But that's a much more actively moving part of the dunes, and that's what makes it so different than the ridge population. Let's turn around, and if you can see, that's that tongue of sand that's moving into the forest that we hiked in on. So that's right behind us here, and you can really see, at least from where I am, it kind of looks like a river of sand. But already what's behind it is starting to revegetate. So, you know, it's a classic example of succession. And yeah, I don't think you're going to be able to see that so well, but the vegetation there has already colonized on the backside of that moving dune. Okay, so we're going to walk down there next into the swale. Okay, we're down here in the swale. And look at this, these PVC pipes are sticking way out, and that means the sand is really cruising through here. And here's a plant, that's a big one, and look at that big wood stem here. Oh man, this thing has been here so long that the tag does not have its number on it anymore. So, might not have shown you that, but the tag actually has lost its black numbering. But this would be an easy one to find because we have the XY coordinate and it's giant, and there's no other one that's going to be around here. The remainder of this plot is pretty much empty. We've got another plant over here with a tag on it, and it's number 828. And here is a tongue depressor with no plant. So that's a plant that died. And there's another tongue depressor plant that died. So there's definitely some mortality, which is no surprise given how much sand has been moving through here. Take a look at some of these other plots. Where clearly the PVC is not sticking out quite as much. Here are some plants. Let's get right in there. There's one with a tag, and it is alive. It's got a couple leaves at the top that are alive. Here's one that has apparently died recently. So has a tag, but that thing is dead. And from what I can tell over the years, if it looks like that, it's not coming back. Although we do keep that tag there for the next year in case with the rains some of this stuff greens back up. Doesn't happen, at least not with any real frequency, but we watch for it. And here's a plant that looks like it died. Some years we have a lot of mortality. Some years we have a lot of reproduction. That plant is alive. They don't look so good when they're tiny like that. Here's a seedling. That's a small seedling, but it's very obviously Eriogonum. It has that woolly growth on the top, and it has kind of a red and green sort of coloration. It's very different than any of the other plants out here, although that's part of the trick for students, is to learn how to identify it from other plants. I'll show you some other ones that might look a little bit like a buckwheat. So we're pretty much in the center of the swale population. I'll just do kind of a roundabout here. Okay, here's one of the other plants out here that can fool you at first. This is a primrose, the genus Camasonia. And at first glance, sometimes people will think that's Eriogonum, but it is not. And that's just something that we learn together. I run around on the dunes while you guys are collecting data, and we figure that out. Over here is, since we're here, we might as well look at a couple cool plants. This is strawberry, Fragaria, and the cool thing about strawberry is it puts out these runners, which are basically above ground stems that can produce new plants. So here we're at the end of one. Let's follow it back. That's a plant that has roots, so that if you cut these red stems it would still live, but it's coming from our left, going back to some mother plant that we may or may not find. And these things can go over quite long distances. Here's one right here that's a single individual of strawberry, and I think you can see kind of a webbing of this stuff in some places. These plants are adapted to a very dynamic, unstable environment that's always changing, often destroyed, and seasonally extraordinarily dry. This is a very dry place in the summer. Obviously it's sand, water drains through very quickly. There's really no precipitation other than fog drip. And then at the other end, it's an extraordinarily wet place in the winter. But of course, the warm growing season is quite dry. So it's a very stressful place for plants. And these guys are adapted to deal with that. So I think next I'm going to go over into that forest and just show you something really cool that's unrelated to our project, if I can find it. Okay, folks, I found what I was looking for, and it's hard to describe to you how impressive this is. I'm standing next to an ant mound, and this one is huge. I don't think you'll be able to make out the ants right now, but when I look at this, I'm seeing thousands and thousands of ants all moving right now across the surface. And this mound is several cubic meters of mass. This is a species of native ant. They're called thatch ants. It's a species of Formica obscuripes, and it's quite a widespread ant. I didn't know anything about it, but when I started working out at the dunes, when I got here 20 years ago, you couldn't help but see these things. It's really quite tremendous. Most of the mounds are smaller. Sometimes they're just tiny little things that are only a foot tall, and sometimes they're this big, but this is quite rare to find it that large. These ants are ecological engines on the dunes. There's no question about it, because there's so many of them and there's so many mounds and they're interconnected that they surely are having a large impact. They're omnivores. They will prey on insects or they will scavenge them. And they also have a fascinating relationship with aphids. Aphids are the little insects that will plug into the phloem of plants, and the pressure of the phloem pushes the sugars from the phloem into their bodies through their digestive tract, and they simply can't absorb all the sugars. So a lot of the sugars come out the anus of the aphid, and there are many ant species around the world that are adapted to simply use that sugar coming out of their anus. And those ant-aphid relationships are very important for a lot of ecosystems, because the ants actually tend the aphids. They will guard the aphids and make sure the aphids are doing well. And that, of course, has a negative effect on the plant. So it's a complicated relationship. And if we're lucky, I'll find some aphids later today. But this one is quite large. What I'm going to do is stop filming and then use the camera to see if I can walk around it behind the camera so you can see the scale of this one. So there's that same mound. That's the tripod I was using, my clipboard. I'm just going to walk up on it in hopes that you can really see this thing. And take a look at it. It's built around a fallen tree. There's actually a tree trunk in there, and it goes pretty far back. And now I'm going to try to see if you can see the ants, since you probably couldn't see the ants. Yeah, see that? I mean, it's an amazing amount of biomass. I've had students do nutrient analyses, and not surprisingly, the soil that's beneath these things is elevated in things like nitrogen and phosphorus and calcium, which are key nutrients out here. But those nutrient plumes extend away from the mounds as well, 10, 20, 30 centimeters at least. And then, of course, they get abandoned and they'll move them. So it's kind of like they're concentrating nutrients out here in a nutrient-poor environment. Okay, well, I found it. We are in a stand of shore pine, and I'm looking at the branch of a shore pine. I'll show you the stand in just a second, but the lighting was nice when I walked up to this, so I wanted to capture this right away. So this is a gall, and this gall is made by a native gall rust called western gall rust. It's very common, and the spores will penetrate the bark and induce this gall, which will eventually produce more spores. And what you'll see are ants crawling all over it. This is something that we've noticed before, and we think that we actually don't know what's going on here entirely, but we think that because the bark is thin there, that it's a really nice place for aphids to hang out, and there are extra sugars there that are available. And you can see all these ants that are scavenging up and down on this branch. Now I don't see any aphids, but I'm going to get my eyes in there and look a little closer in a second, but I just wanted to get these ants first. Okay, well, I've been looking for aphids and hoping to find them with ants tending them, and I haven't found them, but the lighting is changing so rapidly I just wanted to keep filming. A lot of times what happens is you find the aphids at the ends of the shoots where presumably they have a better luck getting into the phloem, and that's where a lot of ants will come out to tend them and then go back. And a lot of times you can find them on the terminal branches away from those galls. I'm not seeing them, and I don't know if it's that I'm just not in the right spot or this isn't a good time of year because it's so dry, but the ants were obviously quite active around that gall. And before I lose the lighting, I'll just show you what this stand looks like. This is a pretty well-developed place with conifers out here, not too far from where we do our study. That's a little dark over there. Shore pines. And here's an ant. Clearly, oh, a couple ants going up and down this pine. Perhaps looking for things to scavenge, but also perhaps looking for the aphids that they regularly tend. And this is where I would expect to see them, but in this light I'm not going to see the aphids up near the ends of these shoots. In my next little clip, I'm going to turn around 2 feet and you'll see there's another ant mound right behind me. Okay folks, well, here's another mound right here. You can kind of get a sense for it. I don't know, it's maybe 3 feet in diameter and 2.5, 3 feet tall. It's amazing. It's got this perennial goldenrod on top of it. It is super active right now, and it's only like, it's about 6 p.m. There's just a little bit of sunlight hitting this, so it's probably still warm. They definitely slow down as soon as it gets cool out. But you can find these things if you go to the dunes. They're not that hard to find. They like to be in this kind of treed area. They like the shore pine. They like to be on the edge of the shore pines. And you don't have to go to Lanphere Dunes to see it, which is not really a place that you could get to without a permit. But you can go to, for instance, Lanphere Dunes and see these quite easily. So I encourage you to go check them out. They're fascinating creatures. Okay, surely this is the last one I'm going to film, but I just was hiking back toward my car and I found yet another one, and it's covered in grasses. So that's interesting to think about, seeds that got there. And this one's still in the sun, so you can really get a sense for all the ants in there. That chance. Super cool. Alrighty folks, last clip here. Thanks for coming along on the walk with me. I hope that it was a good way of seeing the dunes. I just wanted to end by encouraging you to come out to the dunes. I know that a lot of you already know the dune systems locally really well, but some of you probably don't know the dunes that well, either because you're new to Arcata, or maybe you've been focused on, say, marine systems or inland systems. And you might not realize how incredible the dunes are. I believe they're the best, really close by natural environment we have from Humboldt State. It's really easy to get here. There's a lot of public access, and there's still a lot of natural disturbance regimes and natural phenomenon that are still happening out here. So find a place to go out at the dunes. One of the places that I like is out Samoa Boulevard to Malel Dunes. Easy to find on a map, and it's really part of the same system that we've been in today. It's about a 10-minute walk south from Lanphere, and it's a great place to go and see open sand dunes, but also these pine forests. You can definitely find the thatch ant mounds if you're looking for them. And so grab a friend and a mask and head out there if you have a chance. I think we could all use a break, and I think we could all use some time actually looking at these things that we're trying to get a degree thinking about. And in particular, we all need to get away from our computer screens. All right, take it easy.